Morning YouTube. This is a response to Professor Anton's video on education technology. Oh God, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the title. But I'll attach this as a video. Morning, Corey. I'm just about to take the dogs out. It's 7:20 on Friday morning. A great video, thanks for that. I just want to pick up on two things you said and see if I can spin them out. And I should say before I start, some of this stuff is kind of devil's advocate stuff, but you know, fine. And the two bits that I want to pick up on is firstly a question that you ask, which is, can people still have long-term goals? And then I want to pick up on this phrase you use, the lazy are doomed, which is a fantastic phrase. I love that, the lazy are doomed. Fuck on. Yeah, I'll come back to that at the end. Can people still have long-term goals? It's really interesting what you're talking about there, because you're citing it in relation to McLuhan, in relation... Well, you start off by talking about Plato there, which I thought was really interesting, about how Plato... I hadn't come across this before. How Plato was concerned that the development of writing would cause the diminution of cognitive powers as we kind of... instead of memorizing things, we write them down. That's so foresighted. I hadn't realised he'd said that. It's brilliant, brilliant. I mean, obviously he's seeing that as a negative thing, whereas I see it as a positive thing. But I would actually agree that's exactly what happens. You know, I'm thinking of it in terms of offloading cognition. Some of the stuff I'm interested in is epistemic action stuff. I've made a couple of videos about before. Maglio and Kirsch, a couple of researchers, did some work on particularly people who play chess, but other people as well. And they also talk about note takers and writers generally, and they identify that process of using parts of the environment, whether it be papers and pens, or whether it be books, or whether it be pieces of technology, as places where you can offload cognitive effort onto the environment. So instead of having to do all the thinking inside the wetware of your brain, you can do it in the kind of hardened software of the environment around you. You know, even as simple as, you know, just counting on your fingers is an example of that. So whilst I'm sure there are many negative things to say about that kind of offloading process, I'm not coming to that with an assumption that it's a negative. I'm coming to it with an assumption that it's part of the history of our species. You know, the first guy who picked up a rock and used it as a tool of some kind is offloading physical resources onto the environment. So I don't see it as any more of an extension from that. And obviously you'll know much more about that than I do, because McLuhan does write quite a bit about that, and others. Okay, so what's that got to do with what he's talking about? Oh yeah, so this is leading into this can people still have long-term goals thing. I mean, the question that's starting to come up for me there is the focus on this word people. That's one of the crucial things that runs through your presentation. The key term, if you like, the indivisible elements of value and knowledge is the individual human subject. It's the individual learner going into university who is either lazy or hungry. It's the individual reader who either has gained depth from reading being a nothingness, or they are distracted by endless Google searches. You know, it's focused on that level of organisation, the individual human subject. And I suppose I would say that I'm not absolutely convinced that that's necessarily viable or necessarily beneficial. I mean, certainly it has been, and speaking purely personally, of course, and for my family, I would say that yes, human subjects are really important. But in terms of education, in terms of the development of society, in terms of sustainability, in terms of knowledge production and circulation, I'm not sure they are really. It's been valorised, I mean it is valorised, and necessarily so, because the individual human subject has been the best system for organising and collating and compiling and applying knowledge, for sure. But it may be in the future that that's not the case. I mean, I don't want to get all transhumanist about this, but it may well be that we are already in the process of formulating interpersonal systems, community systems, and technological systems, which collate information far better than individual humans do, and make better sense out of the diverse data that exists in the environment around us and that we are instrumental in producing. So I suppose I would just say, yeah, just to reiterate that, a lot of your talk there, Corey, is on the is based on the premise that the individual human subject is the best site for evaluating the conditions of knowledge. And I would just say I'm not so sure about that. So, for example, long-term goals, if I understand you correctly in your speech, in your talk, the long-term goals are the long-term goals of the individual. And undoubtedly some people do have long-term goals, and some of them are good and some of them are not so good. And some of them are a blinding mirage, and cannot be evaluated before time. But the idea that an individual's long-term goals are necessarily worthy of support just because they belong to an individual is one I would question. And that kind of reappears in different forms in your talk there, Corey. You talk about purpose, for example, and its individual purpose. And I know Richard Dawkins talks a little bit about this. I mean, he's talking about religious purpose, and Rick Warren's a purpose-driven life and all that kind of stuff, which paradoxically is not individual purpose. But again, that purposiveness is assumed to be, or to take its value from and to find its home in the body of an individual. And again, I would question that. Okay, the lazy are doomed. I love that phrase. The lazy are doomed. In your talk, you give 3 examples of how to be a university student. You start off with 2, and then you add the 3rd, which I think is really useful. There's the student who treats university as a shopping mall, and they go and buy knowledge products off the shelf. And then there's the hungry student who essentially treats it the same, actually, but they are much more motivated. They raid the shops, they look for the best bargains, they exploit the resources for the best they can. They are driven consumers, they're not passive consumers. The 3rd one, which I think you do kind of get into it a bit later on, is certainly how I would see an ideal student and an ideal colleague in terms of a member of staff, which is a member of a knowledge practicing community. And I'm sure you've had the same experience that I have, that the most learning I have ever done in my life is since I started teaching. And most of the things I've learned in interactions with students. So I get it's participation in those knowledge practices, interpersonal knowledge practices, which I think are really valuable. And I think a student that comes to that with that kind of mindset, rather than being either hungry or a passive consumer, is much more likely to benefit not just from university educational experiences, but any educational experiences, including this one, the YouTube one. And the idea of the hungry student, I have to say I'm a little concerned about that. And I'm going to make an argument here for laziness. I feel like I'm arguing my way out of a job here, I have to say. My last video was about praising mediocrity, and now I'm praising laziness. Hungry students. I mean, again, hunger is such a human desire. The hunger for knowledge, of course, in this case, but hunger generally, the idea that we are driven towards the achievement of some goal, and we acquire as much knowledge or much of any other kind of resource as we can in order to achieve that goal, is, I don't know, I'm not sure how helpful that is, really. I would like to argue a case for laziness, because it's not the lazy people who've decimated the world's resources. Lazy people don't go and fight wars. Lazy people don't decide that empire building is a good idea. Lazy people don't build bombs. Lazy people don't. Sure, they don't. They also don't discover penicillin. I fully accept that, and they don't, find cures for cancer. And I accept there's a limitation to what I'm saying. But lazy people sit in their arse really, and use the minimum of the world's resources, and live in a comparatively sustainable way. I mean, ideally, I would like a kind of combination of highly informed laziness with some kind of humanitarian spirit to keep people reasonably healthy while we have these bodies. Hungry. Some of the most irritating people I've ever met in my life are hungry people, either hungry for intellectual satisfaction or hungry for more, just moreness. Which is, undoubtedly part of the human condition, but it really is one I think we should try and leave behind if we can. I think that's all I've got to say, but it's great stuff there. Thanks very much for that, Corey. I really enjoyed that video.